to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today's guest is a textile artist, farmer, natural dyer, and the founder of Blue Light Junction. Please welcome Kenya Miles. Welcome to the podcast. And how are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. Interviews are few and far between, so I'm excited to hear what we come up with today.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fantastic. I did some research. I didn't go too deep because, sometimes you feel like, all right, I'm lining up things. I feel like I'm stalking online a little bit. I was like, let's learn and then ask questions, be intellectually curious. Yeah. So I wanted a very high level in that introduction or what have you, named a few bullet points. It was literally a copy and paste. Could you share with us those vital stats about your background and describe Blue Light Junction for us?
Yeah. So part of my journey, I will say, to natural dyes has been a very sort of intuitive one. And I went to school. So I'm originally from the area, which is what we called it when I was growing up. But I was born in D.C. and raised between there and PG County. So being in Baltimore feels, closer to home, but I've lived all over. I went to New York when I was 17 for college and was really working in graphics, on air, animation, design, motion graphics and things. So did film and television for several years in New York, and then was really drawn more to using my hands, but I didn't really have a relationship to it. So I decided to leave New York and move to Mexico. And so that really was like what I consider the beginning of my relationship to textiles, fiber, and natural dyes ultimately. So I lived in Mexico for a year, in between Oaxaca City and a small village called Teotitlan del Valle, which is the weaving village. I learned how to weave, embroider, and do all kinds of things. And so I basically spent that time learning different crafts and traditions. Fast forward to traveling for an additional year, moving back to New York, and then ultimately feeling like the West Coast was more like in relationship to what I had been experiencing in Mexico. Obviously, it once was Mexico. Mm-hmm. So I moved out west and just kind of began this journey of exploration. I continued to travel for probably the greater part of 10 years. Every year I would take like 4 months off and just live in another country with another community, different spans of time, and learn a different technique. And so in sort of the midst of that, I was becoming, just an entrepreneur doing my own thing. My parents are entrepreneurs. So was really looking at like being an artist, but having some autonomy, but also having this background in motion graphics, which when you look at what people are getting paid in tech is nothing. But for me, I was making a good living. So I was able to just continue to travel and save up every year and kind of have these experiences. And then ultimately coming into a project with a friend of mine where she was working on, we decided to work on a bag competition that was out of New York through the CFBA. And part of that was we decided to do sustainability. She's from El Salvador. And I think really brought in the idea of using indigo. She was like, my community uses it. I was like, great, let's try it. Her mom sent us a bunch of stuff from El Salvador. We kind of got started. And she was like, I've never done this before. I was like, what are you talking about? So I basically spent 3 months like super obsessed with trying to figure out how to build an indigo vat. And if you have, no relationship to indigo, if you do, indigo is a very magical color. It's a magical energy. And essentially, it took time to understand, like, it's not soluble in water. Right. So I had to find a way to reduce it. That's, it happens through a fermentation process, either chemically or naturally. And it's obviously spanning many cultures. Most cultures have an indigo history. And so I really am sort of grateful for that introduction, and that sort of started my natural dye journey with indigo, and is probably why it's the thing I'm most committed to. Yeah.
Well, I think that's going to end up answering one of my later questions. So I'm cutting that question out now. Thanks, Kenya.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's what I'm here to do. Shut it down.
So, and this is slightly different, but to that question, but I think it has some similarities. Do you have a favorite? I mean, I understand that there's a relationship with indigo, but do you have a favorite natural dye color? What is a favorite there for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say outside of indigo, for me, my relationship to Mexico is very strongly grounded in my work and practice and visual sort of references. And so cochineal, which is a bug, a parasite that lives on the prickly pear, the nopal cactus, is this, ancient color that really is pre-Hispanic, goes back to the Mayan civilization, and it has just the most beautiful qualities, as well as it being, a part of medicine and ceremony and adornment. And so those are the things that for me, like looking at the work that we're doing at Blue Light Junction, is really looking at those things, like the alchemy of the color, but also the magic of the medicine, the ceremony that happens through practices that are indigenous, techniques that also come into play when you're using them in multiple ways, not just for textiles. It's not just fiber, where these colors can be applied or have been applied historically.
So you touched on, and thank you, you touched on initially sustainability. And I realized that in terms of, let's say, textiles, in terms of like fabrics and such, people are trying to move away from like fast fashion and have something that's more sustainable, what have you. That's one part of a definition I've heard. And, from your standpoint, since you mentioned it, what is sustainability? What does that mean to you? And I'm not saying in a got you sort of way. I just want to kind of better understand it.
Yeah, I think that for me, one of the things that I want to honor is that, what isn't sustainable is a system that perpetuates quantity over quality, people over, or product over people. And so I think that when we're looking at natural dyes have historically, prior to the Industrial Revolution, were the ways in which color was used to enhance everything, leather, fiber, a variety of things. And so those practices were also harmful because it was looking at producing for the larger class. It was looking at producing through, once the Industrial Revolution did come, like thinking about manufacturing at a high level. And so you're really setting yourself up to understand that these systems are what is not tenable. And so I think that sustainability for me, for us at Blue Light Junction, which is a space full of collaborators, and I think I didn't answer the question of what is Blue Light Junction, but I will. We're really thinking about what are the things that are essential. We have a community dye day that happens twice a year, and we're really looking at people bringing things in that need to be refreshed, thinking about repair, thinking about keeping things longer. Also, the way in which we have a garden that's adjacent to the studio, and so that's Hidden Harvest, which runs on one side as a vegetable garden, and we run the natural dye garden on the other side. But just thinking about, like, we're not here to sort of submit, put our will onto the garden. The garden shouldn't submit to what it is that we want. And so instead of using the word weed, we call it plants that we're not cultivating, which to hear my son say it at 6.5 is really funny. But he's committed to it, because they are not weeds, that's a judgment. That's a decision about the value of something. And so when we think about sustainability, really it's about like, how do we engage with ourselves and the things that are around us? And primarily for me, we cannot buy all of the hundreds of clothing items that are available, or, shoes or whatever. But ultimately, if you still think that things are disposable, if you still don't understand that care is the most important part of any relationship, and relationships are, really about everything that is around us and not just people, plants being in relationship to that. And earth also means like letting something grow, even though I'm uncertain what it may or may not do. And for me to sit and listen and learn from that plant is important.
So, yeah. So with it, let me re-invite it. What is Blue Light Junction?
Thank you so much for asking. I'm so excited to tell you. Blue Light Junction. Blue Light Junction is a studio in Greenmount West. We're in central Baltimore. We are an alternative color lab processing center. We work primarily with natural dyes through botanical expressions, botanical colors. We're also an educational space. We're a workshop space. Through the alternative color lab, we offer people the opportunity to bring in items that they are looking to enhance, or sort of to the pursuit of using medicine or pigments through botanical colorways. So we offer a variety of things. We're also currently running an artist residency through Blue Light Junction called the Ebora Art and Research Residency, which allow 6 artists and researchers 2 months to come be in the space with a studio and a stipend to really understand their work through the lens of the things that we're doing in community at Blue Light Junction in the studio as well as in the garden. So this is what Blue Light Junction is. We're also growing through Innovation Works partnership, a project called Nature's Color. That's 2 years. This is our 2nd season growing. We're growing with 7 other urban farms in Baltimore City to grow natural dyes, and we process them at Blue Light Junction. So there's so many things that we are, and we're really trying to build this full circle system in Baltimore City, where we're manufacturing, we're growing, we're looking at entrepreneurs who are producing and need these things for their products. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, I'm glad we got that in there first take. No, okay. So let's talk about the process a little bit in a very, very high level, because I think potentially with there being like workshops and there being education, that's one of the things that I heard in their education. I think this is kind of that sazon, that introduction, that kind of, here's an appetizer for why you should be checking out Blue Light Junction. So could you share a bit about what that process looks like and what are some of the maybe techniques that you've learned with natural dyeing? Yeah,
well, I've been a natural dyer for over 12 years, going on 13. And a lot of that really looks like constant experimentation. There are ways in which I understand and I have practices. For instance, one of the practices that I'm really committed to is a practice that is highly used in West Africa, the Bogolo and Fani of Mali, and people who work with mud cloth. And so thinking about the natural iron that's found in this mud and the tannins that they use, tannins which are present in, all kinds of things, but teas, pomegranate, all of these things. And so using those tannins to react the mud to go from that sort of natural mud color to blacks and really dark browns. So I use that practice very often in my own personal work, and really feel connected to it. And I am, African American who has, roots in Virginia. But beyond that, there are all of these like legacies that are unknown within us. And I think that feels very much like one of the cultures I feel mostly drawn to through practice. And so thinking a lot about how these techniques and this work really goes into like expressing different cultures and knowledge transfer. There are many other practices that, can be really done simply, where you're thinking about just making a tea bath,
Yeah.
So you're taking some leaves that are either fresh or dried, putting them into water, letting that come to a simmer. And you take a fiber or depending, indigo doesn't need this process, but you would mordant it. So essentially, even when you're using chemical dyes, you have to have the color be beyond a stain. And so a dye and a stain are different, right? A stain sits on the surface, a dye penetrates and bonds to the fiber. And so we're really looking for that engagement. And so we use mordants. And so industrially, they used a lot of really heavy metals. Now it's kind of been whittled down to potassium aluminum or ferrous sulfate. And then there are techniques that are in indigenous communities, which we have yet to really, I think, exalt in the way that they deserve. But sure, thinking about those things where those dyes can be added to fiber using bioaccumulators. So using plants that are essentially removing aluminum from the atmosphere, from the earth, so that those are the ways. So you'd have something that's mordanted, you would put it in your dye bath, and then just like that, you get color, It's really a magical thing.
Somebody bringing some of these Truth in the Art shirts there to hit this dye bath to get some new color.
We're ready. We're ready.
Right.
Whatever you want to do.
I'm going to hold you to it.
Absolutely.
So this is a question that I came across in doing some of the research here. So do you need to be interested in science to be like successful at natural dyeing? Because I've heard alchemy thrown around. I heard you described as alchemist a few times. So tell me about that. Do you need to have an interest in science?
I think that what I want people to do is to have an interest in multiple ways that the natural dyes have sort of been a part of our everyday life, but we're obviously generations removed from that. When you look at places like India, South Asia, like people are still connected to those things. Mm-hmm. And so it isn't like, oh, do I have to be a scientist? It's like, oh, my auntie is doing this thing and this is what I'm doing, right? So, but you do understand it is, for me, highly related to cooking. There are scientific aspects of cooking, but you don't have to be a scientist to be a chef.
True.
Right?
True.
So natural dyes are the same. I would also look at natural dyes through obviously art and practice culturally and historically, but then thinking about it from really that lens of like botany, chemistry, art, and thinking about history, right? So thinking about the Silk Road and color and how trade and engagement prior to colonial sort of invasion of those things, which we have much less access to that written information, but how all of these cultures, right, can be traced back through different colorways and through trade and engagement in that way.
That makes sense. And yeah, I mean, that comparison to like cooking comes to mind or what have you. Now there's some bad cooks out there. No, that's a value statement.
There are some bad cooks, and those people will probably also burn your t-shirts. So don't let them.
But I do think baking is more science though, because that's numbers, that's measurements. Like I've talked to some chefs or what have you, and I love hearing comparisons to other mediums or other creative practices when describing something. So I talk to certain chefs. It's like, oh yeah, it's like playing jazz. I'm like, hell yeah, tell me about it. So I like that comparison that you made there. So let's see. I got a few more real questions. So this is another one that came from this kind of same pool, the same idea. So do the same dye look different on different sorts of materials? Because obviously it's more than textiles, and so does it look different? Is that depending on how long you maybe do the dye bath? What's that kind of question like? Does dyes look different on different materials?
Yeah, so one of the things that it's important to think about when you're thinking about fiber is that you will ultimately need something that's a natural fiber. So either it's what's called a protein. Protein fiber is something that comes from an animal, or it's cellulose, which comes from plants. And so cellulose could be linen, cotton, hemp, and the fibers that are protein are your silks, your wools, thinking about alpaca, things like that. So each of those fibers carry a different way that they can be colored. So there are different ways to color them, but there are also different shades. There are different ways that those colors retain color in a different way. So there are things called light fastness, wash fastness. And really you're just looking at things that when exposed directly to light or indirectly in some terms, will not necessarily be bleached as highly. Sure. Because all color fades, right? Like you put something in a window, it's going to start to fade. The sun is very strong and it's a concentrated amount of light. But there are colors that are really highly affected by pH. And so that means the higher an alkalinity is next to it, or the lower, whatever the base might be, that will shift the color as well. Cochineal is highly pH sensitive. And so you can get anything from bright pinks to deep purples to oranges with different adjustments, some reds. And so again, like that might not be the thing that you need to put on your body that is going to come into contact with your sweat, areas where you're sweating. Mm-hmm. I also love that it could be performative in that way, where you could like come in one way, and leave another way. You're like, oh, that outfit is so different. Like, oh yeah, I just switched it up on you. I threw some lemon juice on myself in the bathroom and I have a whole new fit. So I love that it's playful in that way. I think we need to be like less serious about permanency, because nothing is permanent. Right. If you've had a single relationship in your life, it ain't gonna last. Nothing lasts forever. And I don't mean that in like, but even just in the way that you're engaged with the person in that moment, Absolutely. Like things shift. They always change, So there is this too shall pass. And so just thinking about things in a more ephemeral way and Sure. being more present in what they offer, I think is really the beauty of natural dyes. But protein fibers will take color much, much better than cellulose fibers. There's also like woods that you can stain colors with, but it's a layering process. We talked about, vegetable dyed leather, tannins that will react, and how people originally used to color leather with, black using tannins and irons. And so there's a lot of different things that I think you can experiment with. And what I love about it is just that there's like an ongoing growth. Even if it looks like I have to come back and refresh that thing, it's not going to be there forever. But, the transition is also the beauty of it too.
What I'm hearing there is I think that a lot of people aren't comfortable with is change, and I think embracing that is important. It's like there's an impermanence there. Everything is going to change, and I like the way you described that. Like, you can go to a party and it's like, look, man, you gotta have 3 different fits on today. It's like, all right, little lemon juice here, boom, different fit. Look at that. I'm like, wow, you got the same cut and everything. Exactly. I know, but and also just right. Recognizing that, moment to moment or what have you, I think it adds a different degree of awareness of how you're shopping, if you're engaged in like textiles, you're buying quality materials. If you want something to last, spend whatever it is up front. but make sure you're getting something that's quality. You don't want something that's chitchy and cheap in terms of quality. And that's also what I'm hearing there. It's at least opening people's mind to have a better understanding of what you're purchasing. I remember when I was younger, I had maybe 10 pairs of jeans, and I was like, none of these are different. They're just kind of like the same style. It's like, what am I, like Steve Jobs, just wearing the same thing? And it's like, no, just buy 2 or 3 good pair, make sure they're different, and then, look at the coloring, look at the stitching, look at these different materials, and you're doing things to be more sustainable. You're doing things to be more knowledgeable where your stuff comes from and how it's being made.
Yeah, and we have to be, clear. Like, I think what tends to happen is that there's a level of luxury and there's a certain, group of people who can afford it. And then there's like everybody else just scraping for, whatever it is. I mean, that's really how the market expanded so much, was like throwing in all of these like opportunities for people who did have less disposable income to really look at like, oh, you can be flashy here too. Oh, you don't need that now. Now you can be flashy again. I think it's really about like buying what you want to buy, buying what you feel good about. Like there are things that I might feel are valuable that you don't feel are valuable, right? And so neither is better or worse. It's just what it is, And so I think thinking about like when we look at luxury, like I remember being, like 20 and going to Prada with a friend when we were in New York, and she was like, oh, I have this umbrella that I need to get fixed. And I was like, what? We're going to go to Prada and they're going to like look at your umbrella? Like, what do you mean? We go to Prada. Prada has like the SKU number for this exact umbrella that they bought in Las Vegas 5 years before. Prada takes it in. They give you a tag number, and they fix the umbrella.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if we think about it in that way, that's the job of the vendor, the artisan, the person who's working on it, is to provide you with something that can be maintained and enjoyed. And so that's what I look at when I look at luxury. I don't think about like, oh, I just spent $7 million on it. Right. Yeah. It could be trash, too. Yeah. It's really just about like, what is the quality of care that person is offering you in service? And again, I have all these relationship metaphors, but it's the same. It's like, what is the quality of service that this person is providing, Yeah. And you the same. So yeah, that's how I see it.
Yeah. The last real question that I have for you, and don't think that you're getting away from these rapid fire questions, because a lot of people think, oh, he all forgot, time to wrap it up, shameless plugs, and I'm out. Nah. So this is the last one I have. Since we're coming up on that 20th anniversary for Station North, I wanted to get maybe some feedback. Maybe describe, if you will, the hallmarks of a strong arts and cultural district, such as like a Station North. Like, what are some of those things that you look for? Because you're in that area.
Yeah, I will say, and I'd like to advance with this, via Gil Scott, one of my favorite poets. Like, I'm new here, right? So I've been in Baltimore for 4 years. I've been welcomed in by many members of the community at all different levels, new, legacy, art, there's all these different spaces, the urban farming community. So I feel like what I really see as a healthy, thriving Station North or an arts district is really uplifting and honoring like all of the voices that are here, not just a singular one, not just the one that shows up for the meetings or the one that has access to, a certain income, like really just being able to offer a variety. Like my thing about main streets are that the main street should reflect the community. Right. We can't just have like a place that is highbrow and nothing that you can get a grab and go, right? Yeah. Because that's really honoring all of the people that are here. And so I want to honor the people in our neighborhood. in our work and in our practice and what we do. And so I'm working to be more present and more visible and listen more and find out what is happening here, and where do I need to soften or open or push a little bit to be a better community member.
Good stuff. Good stuff there. And I agree with what you're saying there. I also love the Gil Scott Heron reference. Yeah. I did a project on the last poets in high school. It was my capstone project. And my dad was like, hell yeah, tell me about it. I was like, all right, Les. It's something when in America. It's like, all right, can you? Yeah. He's like, Whitey is on the moon. I was like, wow, can we have Les?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So that's the wrap up of my real questions. And now I want to ask you a few rapid fire questions. And these are pretty random. So, just whatever comes to mind, let's, top of the dome, let's just do it. Okay. All right. What word do you always misspell?
That's a good question. I don't think that I'm a bad speller, but I misspell a lot of things. I have a 6.5-year-old and he's always like, he'll ask me something and I'm like, I don't know. Like, who knows the answer to that? I don't know. I mean, I think that probably plants. Like, I probably misspell plant names and not like the botanical name, but just like the regular name. I'm like, how do you spell? We have amaranth, for instance, in the studio. And I'm like, I don't know how to spell that.
Just what comes first? All right. Yeah. Did you have a nickname growing up?
Yes, I have a nickname that only my family calls me, so I'm not going to tell anybody here. No.
I did it.
No, I'm kidding. My middle name is Juanita, so my family calls me Nita.
That's my mom's name.
Is it?
Yes.
Great name.
It is. If your life had a mascot, this is where it gets really weird. If your life had a mascot, what would that mascot be?
Well, definitely wouldn't be a penguin because that was my high school mascot and that was black. We were like, already the laughing stock of DC public schools. School out walls with penguin. What would the mascot be? I mean, I'm really fascinated by tigers, not like Tony the tiger, but like an elegant tiger in the wild.
Like Ted the tiger. No, okay.
I don't know Ted, but yeah, a tiger that is not a cartoon. Tiger that is real.
Everything has to be a cartoon for me, though.
I guess if it's a mascot, but a tiger.
That's great. And it's funny because I feel like if you start looking at like the mascots for like HBCUs, most of them are tigers. We love tigers.
I guess there you go. And I always wanted to go to a black college because art school is not black,
No.
Yeah.
They claim to be woke sometimes, but it's not black. Lastly, what is the silliest invention you heard of? I remember back in the day, the slap chop existed, all of those kind of infomercial sort of things. It's not great, but so people look for these kitchen gadgets, right? Hey, we hate cutting things. Here's something they'll do the work for you.
Yeah.
What do you feel like is a silly invention that you heard of? I would imagine, you've come across an infomercial here or there.
I mean, so I guess more than the silly invention, because I don't know that I have that story, because I'm like, I don't remember, is that I used to I worked news in San Francisco for 10 years, and I worked until midnight. So I would come home and I needed to like decompress because news is really intense. And so I would either sit in the dark for an hour and just like sit in the dark with no sound, no nothing. I had to share that with my roommates in case they would get up, just like in the middle of the night, like, wait, you're just there.
You're like, why are you there?
Right. But the other thing I would do is on a Friday night, I would get off work and I would watch the infomercials for like 2 hours. And I loved it because I was like, this is entertainment.
Yes.
Right? Like these people are so theatrical in their like, 15 more. What do you, oh, Debbie, oh, 14, oh, we're going, oh my goodness. And you can't get this anywhere else. You know, like just the like height of desire, like it was just dripping with it, you know? And so I think that is, you know, for me, maybe more of what I'm drawn to rather than the I don't remember half the garbage, you know. I fortunately never, you know, I wasn't like, you know, buying things, but it was a little
on
bit
TV.
Yeah, it was a little bit like in Requiem for a Dream, where she's Ellen Burstyn is just watching hours of infomercials. I was just so, and then my roommates joined me because they realized, they were like, "This is great." I'm like, "It's great. It's so good."
I can almost see like the TV just coming after you, like the refrigerator came after her.
Exactly. At some point, it's like, buy something or beat it. You know.
This is the last observation I'll have. I used to use that. So you mentioned like the comparison to relationships a few times. I remember that was a vetting tool I used to use. Of if I was going to date someone, will they stay up with me and watch infomercials, specifically the ones that have like, remember we listened to this growing up, girl? Yeah. And it's just you're so corny.
Yeah. No, I love those. And it was like the only time you saw Black people. And they're like, "Oh, that was my favorite one, David. You know, I loved it. We danced slow and, you know, like a whole vibe." No, those were the days. I mean, there's so much TV now. Nobody's watching those infomercials. I mean, you know what? Maybe they do, because they aren't the Kardashians on those things now.
Yeah, probably.
I don't know.
Yeah,
but it's like, I think people just follow them. But like Joan Rivers, like there were a lot of really solid people who had infomercial spots, and so entertaining. So entertaining.
Yes. So that's pretty much it. I want to, one, thank you for being on this podcast. This has been a lot of fun. And two, I want to encourage and invite you to tell the fine folks where to check out your website, where they can find you at online.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. This felt natural and easy, so thank you. We are at bluelightjunction.com. You can find us online. We also have open volunteer hours at the garden at Hidden Harvest every Saturday, 12 to 3. We are there. You don't need to know anything more than how to get there, and we will open up the rest. So we would love to have you.
So there you have it, folks. I want to, again, thank Kenya Miles from Blue Light Junction for coming on to the podcast today. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.